Hello, hello, hello. I'm just setting up just a tiny bit. Just a tiny bit. As you know, the first 10 seconds is devoted to technical stuff that really should be edited out. But if I knew how to edit such things out, maybe I would be teaching something else. No, I would never teach anything else. Okay. Alright. Double checking that this is actually recording. Yes. Alright. Hello, hello, hello. Apologies. I have not made a new installment in a while. I've been reading up on a lot of different things and sinking into the prelude, and so I thought I'd kind of take a break from Wordsworth for a bit, just a video or two, and talk about Romeo and Juliet and revenge tragedy. This play plays with revenge tragedy in a way that can be really helpful to think about the context of certain scenes, and also to think about how you might talk about love in Romeo and Juliet and link it to genre and actually say something different. Because I actually think, because this play is not a very clear-cut revenge tragedy, as we're about to see, it's got you've got more to work with when it does go into the revenge mode, and it's very interestingly linked to the love plot. So something you can easily link to your views of love paper, which I'm imagining most of you are doing. Okay. Or will have been doing. Will have been doing. It's hard to know the temporality when I'm recording this for eternity. Alright. So, first of all, what is revenge tragedy? You might think, okay, tragic play, ends badly, cool, lots of people dead. We know that much. Tragic flaws. Tragedy we pretty much are familiar with. Big epic heroes. Revenge tragedy focused on revenge. So the Macbeth's murder of King Duncan, say, is not a vengeful act. King Duncan does nothing to Macbeth. Now, is the battle that ensues with Malcolm, does that fit into revenge tragedy? Maybe. There's an element of that, at least. But, again, when the primary motivation is not revenge, hard to say that we're talking about a revenge tragedy. And the funny thing is, a lot of the story of Romeo and Juliet is built around the context of a revenge tragedy, but it's really not a revenge tragedy. It's much closer to being a parody, or just a text playing with the genre of the revenge tragedy, and we'll see why it plays with it in a moment. So, first of all, here are some of the classical conventions for a revenge tragedy, which are very important because they form something of a joke. So, if you know, let's say, that a song has a certain chord progression, let's say, and then you mess up the chord progression, or you play it backwards, without knowing the original chord progression, it might just sound ridiculous. With knowing it, you can kind of see the games that are being played. So you'll see how this convention plays out. Outsized rage and grief and unspeakable wrong. Murder of immediate family, rape, cuckolding, expressed with extraordinary rhetorical flourish, I should add, by a person of tremendous stature. Why? Because the more stature the main characters have, the worse the wrong. If I kill your father and he's a king, like Hamlet, it's much more disgraceful than just killing a regular person for the Elizabethan imagination. And we'll talk a little bit more in another video that I'm planning about regicide, killing kings, and just the concept of the king, which, like, the closest thing we have to the Elizabethan version of a king is a celebrity, but you'd have to think about a celebrity as you would as a die-hard fan that would follow that celebrity around. That seems to me like the closest thing we have to the worshipping quality of the semi-divine king of Elizabethan England. Okay, so, alright. We're talking extraordinary rhetorical flourish. This is a person who is really gonna think out their revenge. They're gonna struggle with the dilemmas of vengeance. They're going to contemplate what the best method is and the meaning of the method. They'll talk it out. They'll talk it out well before they kill anyone. Okay, so alongside that, there's the second aspect of this, which is extremely well thought out plot of revenge, filled with inner and outer conflict, as well as the assumption of disguise, often of madness. We see this in Hamlet, but generally speaking, there's an ideal that the vengeance has to carry a moral dilemma with it. Vengeance, if you think about it, is a moral conundrum. You are about to do something really bad in a context that makes it seem half decent. Like, you kill someone who just raped and murdered your entire family, let's say, somehow, or did parts of that, and it's much more palatable than killing someone because you want to become a king yourself, or any other reason you might have to commit an atrocity towards someone. That's partly why there is an unspeakable wrong. There is a huge disgrace that you see usually on stage in a revenge tragedy, so that we can, or you hear about it at length on stage, so that you can really have that empathetic view of the Avenger, especially since the atrocious reprisal, Convention C, is really supposed to be much, much, much worse than the actual act. So, in Euripides' The Bacchae, the god is disrespected. Dionysus comes over, disrespected. Okay, it's a bit of an atrocity to disrespect a god, by virtue of them being a god. But fair enough, they don't know that he's a god. The revenge for this atrocity, mother killing her son. In some cases, people will be fed their children. Fed their corpses, their children corpses. So Dionysus makes the mother think of her son, the king, as lion, imagining him as a lion, and she hunts him down and she beheads him. It's just pretty atrocious, but the vengeance must somehow outdo the initial offense. Not only murdering, but serving them. Not only murdering the offender's son, but serving them up for dinner. Alright. Then comes, this is all, I should have said this before, this is all a very Roman kind of ideal. This dates back to Seneca, if not earlier. We mentioned Euripides as well, on the Greek end of things. It's a very different world, where, for one thing, death is much, much, much more common. Though death is very common in Elizabethan England as well. But again, the farther you go out in history, the more people randomly die. The more victims to the elements we become. So, Roman ideals, generally speaking, thinking about Greco-Roman mythology, gods are pretty outraged. We just talked about Dionysus doing some shady things with his Bacchae, with his followers. There isn't as much of a sense of turning the other cheek. Not to say that there's any. And forgiveness. There's much more of a sense of punishment. If you look at a collection of mythologies like Metamorphosis, very often a god will do something bad with a human being. The human being will be complicit in some ways, and another god will just turn them into something. Like a cow, or a piece, or a sheep. Something small. Mouse, sometimes. At any rate, vengeance is much more common, makes much more sense in the Greco-Roman ideal than the Christian ideal, where, and you see that in the turn from the Old Testament to the New Testament, where suddenly the rule about stoning becomes, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Suddenly there's this huge limitation placed on stonings, which were very common method of retribution for all manners of crimes and sins in Old Testament times. And this is from Paul's, I think, of letters to the Ephesians. I'm not good on my Bible quotes, but this is a famous biblical expression of the ideal of love. And because Romeo and Juliet is a play that is devoted to Christian ideals and gives its monastic, its Catholic religious person the third most lines after Romeo and Juliet, I think it's safe to say that it has in mind some biblical phrases. And the friar does paraphrase some biblical verses and biblical ideals. So it really stands to reason that this would have been top of mind for Shakespeare's. Love is patient, love is kind, love holds no records of wrong, which is a really intriguing thing, because if you remember, just before Romeo gets to the whole vengeance sequence, he talks about Tybalt as his cousin and how much he loves him. And even when he's about to commit the murder, he will bring that up again. So, again, you can definitely see how this does not work with any idea of vengeance. If you do not hold a record of wrong, you're not going to be in any way vengeful. Sure, you could say, well, you don't exactly love your enemies, but then Christianity also tells you to love your enemies. So, if you combine those two phrases, you're supposed to hold no record of wrongs from your enemies. I don't think Shakespeare would have subscribed to that extreme view, but I think that's a big part of what makes revenge tragedy problematic for Shakespeare. Hamlet, the Shakespearean revenge tragedy, also has, like, Hamlet speaking about biblical quotes and asking Laertes for forgiveness just before death. Whereas in classical revenge play, not only is no one asking for forgiveness, there's much more glee at vengeance. Like, yes, I've killed you. Fantastic. So good. No need to have too many quandaries about this. Now eat your children. Eat your children. Have yourself a nice little dinner. On me. Okay. I'm trying to emphasize just the gruesomeness of the genre. initially. Okay, and when you see, I got a bit of the prologue here, and just think about what it sets up in terms of expectations. From ancient grudge, these two foes break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, there's just a sense of like, an ancient grudge. It's just almost beyond history. Generations upon generations upon generations of these families just killing each other and harming each other. And you're ready to play. And from the start, I would say, it's clear that there's a lot of fun had at the expense of vengeance. From the start, there's a sense that this, like, ancient grudge is as much a source of comedy as it is a source of anger. There's like, do you bite your thumb at us? Well, I bite my thumb. Not necessarily at you. There's just this, like, a chance for a tit for tat. And when it can't be emphasized enough that the ancient grudge, you'd expect the old Capulets to just be the most outraged when Romeo shows up at the ball. And instead, the reaction is more than benign. It just is flabbergasted with the whole idea of an ancient grudge. So it's almost like this prologue is comical in its depiction of the ancient grudge, because the old man just goes, Romeo. I hear good things about Romeo. Decent chap. All of Verona speaks well of him. I do not see why we should ruin our solemnity this way over, like, a gentleman, fellow gentleman. And then he goes into a speech about, we're not old. Like, it's clear he has this speech with his cousin where he says, we're too old for this nonsense, for these ridiculous flames of passion. So there's a sense in which, if this is about the ancient grudge, the ancients are not really begrudging anyone. And even the scene before, just think of the classical stratagem for tragedy, for revenge tragedy. Tybalt is supposed to come in, do something utterly atrocious. Utterly atrocious. Then Romeo should give intense speeches. He should deliberate. He should contemplate a murder far greater than anything that Tybalt has done, which should have been much worse than just accidentally killing his friend. Or, if not accidentally, then it seems still somewhat in play. Somewhat in play. Definitely the way Mercutio describes it suggests that this is far from an atrocity. That this is a scratch. This is a comical interlude, almost. It's one of the most amazing things about this scene is only Shakespeare, to my knowledge, makes a murder scene comical in nature. Like, just purely comical. And we'll think about this, but part of what is happening is, and I didn't quote this, but it's useful to think about, Tybalt coming in and saying to Romeo, you're a villain! And Romeo says, I'm not a villain. I'm okay. I'm okay. Come on. I love you for reasons that you don't even know yet. I just married your kinswoman. So, to begin with, come sir, your passado. Any fight that begins with your passado suggests that there is going to be just a fencing exchange, perhaps even a joyful fencing exchange, and that in a way the whole vengeance plot, such as it is in this case, is based on nothing, based on very little. Like, this is supposed to be almost as much in play as the servants trying to tease each other and pick at each other's egos. So Romeo, in a way, and Mercutio will say this to him, he precipitates the tragedy by trying to prevent it, which is already something of a joke. Something of a joke on the element of atrocity. Like, instead of, like, beat down their weapons, gentlemen, for shame, forbear this outrage. Tybalt, Mercutio, the prince expressly had forbid this bandying in Verona streets. Hold! Tybalt, good Mercutio! The Tybalt, under Romeo's harm, thrusts Mercutio in and flies. There's no great huge violence. There's a game gone wrong almost. And he flies. He's clearly terrified at what he's done. And there's no grand feeling. This happens within 4 lines. It happens so quickly. And look at this response. Courage, man. The hurt cannot be much. There is the opposite of an immense wrong. The hurt cannot be much. And Mercutio, in his superb style, no, it is not as deep as a well, nor as wide as a church door, but it is enough. It will serve. It will serve. To be served death is an interesting... Mercutio and his ability to find a humor even in his own murder is quite a delight. I am peppered. I warrant for this word. A plague on both your houses. Zounds, a dog, a rat, a mouse, a cat, to scratch a man to death. Which, again, just the absurdity of being scratched to death. And goes well with the whole concept of this is the, as opposed to an atrocity as a murder can be. It's a game gone wrong. It's a scratch that has served a little too much. Now comes Romeo's, like, the making of the Avenger part of Revenge Tragedy. And again, this is supposed to be many soliloquies, many debates with friends and yourself, like internal debates about how terrible revenge is. Here, but how necessary, how scary it is. This gentleman, the prince's near ally, my very friend, had got this mortal hurt in my behalf. My reputation stained with Tybalt's slander. This is all he has. In terms of, again, this Roman ideal of a reputation, your honor stained with Tybalt's slander. Tybalt, that an hour had been my kinsman. An hour ago he was my kinsman. And honestly, we know that he treated him as such, well, earlier than an hour ago. Much more like 5 minutes ago. Oh, sweet Juliet, thy beauty had made me effeminate, and in my temper softened valor's steel. Now, it's a very clear statement. He's saying, we have this mental strength, this steely courage. Courage and steel go hand in hand. But the effeminate side, the love that he feels for Juliet, softens that metal. Softens it, makes him less courageous. But think about this in terms of genre and what it says about love. One of the things he's saying is, how did I let this happen? How am I just responding to slanders with appeasing words instead of, like, fighting for my honor? Like a Roman man would, like a revenge tragedian, tragic hero would. How am I doing this? Well, it's the love's fault. So there's a misogyny to the statement of women, they make us soft, they make us weak. But there's also a generic statement about love, and how, love does not work well with revenge strategy. We've seen this before with Romeo refusing to fight, and we see it here with Romeo blaming Juliet and his love for her, for his inability to participate in the whole ancient grudge. Now, it took me a while to see the parody in this, but I hope that now that we're thinking about the revenge tragedy and its loftiness, its ideals of honor and justice and retribution, that we will think about the humor of these lines. That gallant spirit had aspired the clouds, which too untimely here did scorn the earth. A character just dying, being described as too good for the earth, refusing to be part of the earth. This would not be a joke, except it is applied to Mercutio, the most earthly sex fiend of the play, one of the most sexually obsessed and earth-obsessed, material, physical characters in all of Shakespeare. To think of him as a gallant spirit that aspires to the clouds, that wishes to be above things, when he was the one exposing the falsehoods of Romeo's ideals throughout the play, is just, it's so clearly superimposing a sentiment that would work really well in revenge tragedy. Oh, the atrocity! A character too good for Earth, killed before his time. And imposing it on a character that is honestly just barely good enough for comedy, and as a tragic figure, again, he makes his own death a joke, which suggests that just, like, the amount of parody that's going on. It's a death not to be taken seriously, even by the person dying. Okay, so Romeo says something, again a little verging on parody, a little just banal. This day's black fate on more days doth depend. This but begins, the woe others must end. Just has this, like, I don't even know, this attempt to rhyme your way into, like, an heroic couplet. Maybe we'll assume an heroic ideal if we start speaking in heroic couplets. Enter Tybalt, but here comes the furious Tybalt back again. Alive in triumph, and Mercutio slain? Away to heaven, respective lenity. In fire-eyed fury be my conduct now. So, the making of the Avenger, instead of multiple scenes, 2 lines. And that line, one of them is a joke. One of them is absolutely a joke, because you have go to hell turned into go to heaven. Go to heaven! Gentleness and lenity and lenience and forgiveness. Go to heaven. It's like a reversal. Again, the Christian Romeo peeping out. The ideal of heavenly lenity. Religious ideals need to go to heaven. Just go away. But ironically, again, reversing that statement. Away to heaven, respective lenity. Fire-eyed fury be my conduct now. Now, Tybalt, take back again the villain. I want you to insult me again. Insult me again. This is so absurd. Like, think about this for a moment. Again, in terms of the tragedy, this is supposed to be such an atrocity that it's not enough to just kill the person. You have to kill their children. You have to do something really, really horrible and spectacularly gruesome to them. And Romeo, the atrocity that has happened more or less accidentally, is so beneath the realm of revenge tragedy that Romeo has to ask Tybalt to insult him again. It's not even enough that he killed Mercutio by accident, by all of my measures of literary criticism, but he needs to offer another verbal insult so that Romeo has pretext to attack him. It's just, obviously Romeo would have attacked him anyway, but it's just a little spicing up that says, here's how ridiculous this is. We're gonna make jokes about this. We're gonna treat Mercutio as a heavenly, angelical figure, which everybody knows he is anything but. And we're gonna ask to be insulted just so that we can attack someone who just killed our friend. It's like, just that extra bit of touch, that beautiful touch. For Mercutio's soul is but a little way above our heads, and I think that's, again, fantastic, the little way above our heads. Because Mercutio, even when he dies, you really can't imagine him hanging out in too heavenly a space. He's far too obsessed with material things. Now, you could say, oh, it's a little way above our heads because he just recently died, but I think there's also an element of his death was kind of ridiculous, so he's not the kind of character to even hope for or want a heavenly afterlife. So the fact that he's hanging out just a little bit above the earth even after death is really, really charming in terms of drawing attention to how inappropriate this is for a revenge plot. Staying for dying to keep him company. He wants your company. And it's, again, I feel like on some level this works seriously. On some level he is saying, oh, you're about to join him among the dead. But again, many of these tragedies, I think of the movie Gladiator and how Russell Crowe is told that he will see his family soon. And it's interesting, it's a friendly concept. Even this vengeance has become like a social activity. Like, well, one of us has an appointment with the dead soon. Like, there's something about this that just makes even this act of willful murder, the first one, I would say, this first real fight, serious fight, without a passado, without a ceremony, without taunts, just fight me. Even this is about keeping a friend company. One of us has to hang out with him. We know Mercutio is a social guy. And Tybalt responds in kind. Thou wretched boy, that didst consort him here, shall with him hence. With the intonation, again, that he's a bit of a lackey, perhaps that he's homosexually inclined towards Mercutio. And again, there's a sense of, okay, just as I'm gonna kill you, but it's really gonna be a social reunion for one of us, and probably for you. So just taking the concept of revenge and turning it into a social visit is the opposite of treating the gravity. Like, instead of thinking about, Hamlet thinks about killing Claudius and giving him a great afterlife because he's just repented. And instead here, there isn't any thought necessarily of the fate of the soul. It's just a matter of who's going to keep Mercutio company. He's going to hang out just a little bit above us, instead of way above us, or way beneath us. He's going to be just... And it's time for one of us to fly over, because you wouldn't want to keep him waiting too much. Anyway, we have to keep him company. Can't be alone. Okay, think. They fight, Tybalt falls. Shalt with him hence. I think the staging of this would have to be amazing, because there has to be so many movements This would be actually probably one of the hardest scenes to stage from a directorial perspective, because character's gonna jump out of stage. Tybalt just ran out of stage. He's gonna run back. They're gonna fight for a moment. Romeo's gonna run off. A citizen has to come in within moments of Romeo running off. All of these comings and goings, they're gonna be hard on a stage. But, and I think, again, a sped up, we talked about in class about how Shakespeare takes months of a poem and turns them into days. This is taking acts of a revenge tragedy and turning them into lines. Whole acts. Whole deliberations turned into 2 lines here. 2 lines there. Okay. Be gone. Stand not amazed. And again, it's like, this statement has to be made within seconds of Tybalt's death. And it just, even that to me is a sign that the murder just doesn't have the gravitas. It's not the important aspect of this play. That you can't even hang out for like 3 seconds after you murder someone. You have to, like, the fact that you stand there over someone's corpse for a few seconds is already, like, an amazing thing. Stand not amazed. Don't be so shocked. It's time to run away. Run away immediately. And Romeo ends with, I am fortune's fool. And again, this is one of those things where the direct translation of this statement is fine, which is Romeo calling attention to how he's a star-crossed lover. A lot of things kind of just happen to him. He runs into people, falls in love with them, murders them. Very little is... He doesn't even, like, go... He doesn't even have the idea of going to a ball himself. He's kind of dragged to the ball. There's a lot of kind of wandering. He's a meanderer of sorts, Romeo. So, on the one hand, it makes perfect sense that he is saying, I have really been done with by fate. I'm really getting played by fortune. Just it's her fool. On the other hand, the fool is this beautiful comic character that would normally be there to punctuate and comment on the tragedy and show on the one hand an absurd mirror phase of it, but on the other hand just how devastating what is happening to the king is. So the fool in King Lear. Without the fool, you have half the sense of the tragedy, but when the King Lear and the fool basically change places, and the fool is as powerful, if not more powerful, than King Lear, in those exchanges, you really see the tragedy of King Lear in a way that you wouldn't if there wasn't a court jester turned king in his stead, or self-terming himself king, kind of positioning himself in a place of power, telling King Lear what to do in some cases, etc. For Romeo to be a fool in this act of murder, it's not just that it's saying vengeance doesn't work for Romeo because nothing is serious enough. Just like Mercutio laughs at his own murder, Romeo's become a fool. He's become a joker, a jester, in committing murder. It's a joke to be murdered, it's a joke to murder. It's the whole thing is reeks of comedy. Reeks. So there's an element of that. There's an element of Romeo saying, listen, I just committed this murder. I did. But I don't want you to actually think that this revenge is in any way a vengeful experience. And I think that's one of the most beautiful aspects of Romeo, is he is so defined by his size of love that for him to commit these murders that are necessary for him to become implicated and separated from Juliet, to make the plot more desperate, he needs to do these things, but at the same time, he needs to be very distant from them. In his language, contemplating them, in his pointing out that this is not what he would do as a loving character, which is what he is, and in his proclaiming himself a fool to have murdered someone that he just was outraged with. Again, the outrage lives for a very short period of time here, and he will then murder Paris, I feel, just because there's something really, really charming about the way Romeo responds to murdering characters. He murders Paris and then he brings him to be buried with Juliet. Something about Shakespeare that says, instead of your motivations being always revenge and love getting kind of smothered and like no relationship, like even think about the concept of feeding someone their children in terms of what you're saying about the importance of revenge relative to love. You're saying it's so important to avenge a wrong that I will destroy someone's innocent children, make them part of this sick play of justice, and destroy that relationship as well. Like, there's something about destabilizing the whole kingdom in the name of revenge. And Shakespeare turns this on its head, and he says, not only is vengeance not worth doing that to someone's children, but really, if you are a loving character, revenge can only play a very, very temporary role. Before you realize that you're just a fool, you're just playing, it's a joke. Revenge is a joke in this play, which I think is one of the most exciting ways of moralizing over a Roman format. Saying, you know what? This is a bit of a silly thing. This thing we're doing, it's more befitting a fool, a court jester, than it is befitting a tragic hero. And actually, if we focused on love some more, we would not be nearly as vengeful. And what little vengeance we do commit, we will immediately regret. And show generosity of spirit. Alright, so a true love story turns vengeance into a joke. I like that explanation a lot. I like it. I think that's why we get the parody of Mercutio as an angel. That's why we get keeping him company, which is a bit of a joke. Consorting with him, bit of a joke. You get to have your gay your homoerotic relationship with Mercutio after life as corpses is just, yeah, just a little bit of a toying there. Even there's an affectionate aspect to, let's do vengeance from an affectionate perspective. Let's just avenge someone so that the avenged spirit doesn't get lonely, so that he has company. So I think those are some of the ways that Shakespeare turns revenge tragedy on its head to show that love actually holds no record of wrong, and that whatever vengeance is there is more affectionate and silly and a joke than it is an epic ideal that should be aspired to and moralized over and philosophized and pursued to its Roman extreme. Okay. Thank you so much for listening to this somewhat repetitive video. But I think it was useful. I enjoyed it. And I think that's my favorite contestant in... I like talent shows, and my favorite contestant came on a talent show, horrible singer. And he came on and they asked him, "Why are you here?" And he said, "I'm here to entertain myself." And there's something charming about that. So, in some ways, I'm here to explore literature with you, but also for myself. I like that. Okay. Thank you so much. And if I actually know how to stop a screen recording, you might not have to listen to me blabber for much longer. Yes. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day, night, whatever, whenever you listen to this.